Hi guys, today we'll be installing the Roto-fab air intake system on a 2017 Camaro ZL1. So we'll start by removing the stock air intake assembly. I've already disconnected the battery and I'm ready to start working in the engine compartment. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm following the instructions so that when you see this video, hopefully I'm going in the same order that you'll be going in. So I'm going to start by disconnecting this breather tube, and do so by depressing the back side of it, and you'll feel it press in. While you're pressing, pull it outward to release. The next thing I'm going to do is remove the mass airflow sensor. Now I'm not disconnecting the electrical connector, I'm simply unbolting the MAP sensor and leaving it plugged in. So I'm going to use a Torx wrench to do this. These screws will not be reused. That's very important. We supply screws for the new MAP housing, and these will strip out the MAP housing. So now I'm going to use a pry tool or a large screwdriver to remove this retainer, allowing me to slide the mass airflow sensor outward. And I'm going to carefully store it right behind this cap. So go under the hose and behind this cap, and it should sit right there and be out of the way. Now I'm going to use an 8mm socket to loosen the hose clamp at the throttle body. Get it nice and loose. Pull that off of there. Now there is a retainer down here. As you can see in just a moment here, I'm going to pull straight upwards to dislodge the airbox from the chassis. There's an ear and a retainer, and you'll have to use a pry tool to dislodge this retainer. Now our car has already had the Roto-fab intake system in it, so we've already taken care of this. So now what I'm going to do is pull the airbox assembly out. Notice that this grommet came with the airbox. I'll take that off. Put this grommet back in its place. I'm going to look to make sure that all three grommets are in their place and seated, and as you can see, this one is missing. I just dropped this air intake in here for the purpose of this video, so I'll put that back in, and then we'll use our supplied cable ties. Again, our air intake has already been installed on this car, but we'll use one cable tie around these two lines and the AC line. And what that's doing is replacing the retainer that you removed. And we want to tighten that just enough to hold the hoses away from the pulley. We still want this to be able to move during motor rock, but we don't want to take a chance on the hose getting into the pulley. Now over here, we're going to install another cable tie. And what this does, we're going to pull these into, there's about 1/8 of an inch gap between the two. And what that's doing is holding us upward and creating clearance between this pulley and this line. Even though it looks like there's good clearance there, when things heat up and age, this has a chance of falling down into the pulley. So we're just doing that to help out. So we're down under the hood. Actually, we have one thing to do on the hood. Right here, we use a 10mm socket to remove this screw. And you can see that I've already replaced this with an Allen head button head screw. And straight across, if you look at this dimple right here, and where it ends, straight across, that's the screw that we'll replace. And what we're doing is creating more clearance for the filter, and we don't have the sharp edge that you normally have with the hex head bolt. With the stock intake removed, the next thing is to remove the small breather tube. Now, as mentioned before, our intake has been in and out of the car a few times, but what you're dealing with is a clamp much like this larger clamp, and this isn't a reusable clamp. So the way I like to disassemble these is you find the tail or the end of the clamp and get under it with a small pocket screwdriver and pry upwards so that you can expose the tail of that clamp enough that you can get a hold of it with a pair of side cuts or dikes. Once you can get a hold of that, then you just peel back and remove the clamp. So we're just going to pop this out and save this. We're going to use it again in a little while. So the first step in our pre-assembly will be to install the map housing. And one of the things I want to point out to you is our map housing seals to the airbox with this flange. You can see we've molded in 5 brass inserts which will accept the mounting screws that mount the map housing to the airbox. What this does, not only does it give us a seal and rigid mounting to the airbox, but it also creates a large radius entry on the inside of the tube, which really helps the airflow and presentation to the mass airflow sensor. Also, it gives us a huge 6-inch clamping surface for our filter. And with this car pushing the horsepower that it's pushing, you need all the air you can get. So we install this through the airbox. And looking from this side, you can see that we end up in approximately the 10 o'clock position relative to the airbox, looking from the front of the map housing. We're going to locate our 5 1032 screws. We're going to start all these screws. While I'm doing this, if you can see the top contour of the airbox, and we're often asked, does your air intake seal to the hood? And the answer is yes. All of our air intakes with this type of design actually seal to the hood. And you can see that we go through a lot of work to make sure that we follow the contours of the hood. So when the hood seals on, you won't see all these ups and downs. You'll see some of them, but we've done the work to make sure that it seals. That gives you all the advantages of a lid, and it maximizes the space inside of the airbox. If we were to put a lid on this airbox, we would have to go to a smaller filter, and also we'd have to drop down the airbox to get on one plane for the lid. So by using this design, we're maximizing airbox volume. I'm going to use a longer screwdriver just because it's easier to get past the map housing. Once all 5 screws are started, just going to draw them down lightly to make sure that we've drawn the map housing flush to the airbox. Once I'm drawn flush to the airbox, I'm going to tighten all the screws. The next step is to install the bottom hood seal, which this was already on the airbox. So what you do, starting at this corner, we're going to flush up the seal. I'm just going to work it on as we go on the entire length and just push to make sure that it's fully seated. Our next step is to install the hump hose, and I want you to see that these are silicone, 100% silicone. They're not going to dry rot, they're not going to crack, and if you clean up your car for car shows and so forth, these will give you a nice shiny finish. Now notice in your hardware kit that you have large hose clamps and smaller hose clamps. The hump hose side is going to use the large hose clamps. So again, referring to the 10 o'clock position, we're going to face that head of the clamp upwards, and it's going to end up right there in line with the map housing. So we'll slide one clamp on, and we're going to engage the hump hose. We're going to rotate this clamp right there. using a 7mm socket. Just going to tighten that one. Make sure that the hump hose is fully engaged onto the mat housing. And then make sure that the hose clamp is located correctly. See here, we've actually slipped inward a little more than we wanted to, so I'm going to move this out. You can actually use your hands to feel where that's at too. We want the hose clamp to be within the material. In other words, we want material on either side of the hose clamp because the hose clamp will actually compress the silicone. But part of the retention of the hose coupler is that it's compressing in the silicone. If we were to line up this hose clamp on the edge, flush with the edge of the hump hose, then we have a chance that the hump hose could walk off through motor rock. So again, make sure that you have material on both sides of the hose clamp, and that'll hold true with the rest of the hose clamps as well. What the hump hose does, by the way, we've mounted rigid to the air box as we discussed. We've created this seal. The air box is mounted rigid, so something needs to take motor rock. So this hump actually collapses and expands during motor rock, so it's working in and out, and it also is absorbing any vibration that might try to travel its way to the mat sensor. This is our inlet elbow, and you can see that we've incorporated a nice radius into this elbow. Also, it is larger on the inside, on the inlet side, than the throttle body or the outlet side of the elbow. So what happens is we have a taper through the entire length of this elbow. Also, molded in brass fitting. If there's ever any problem screwing in the small breather hose, it's going to be on the breather end and not on the inlet elbow. We're going to find that breather piece that we removed from the stock intake earlier, the small 90-degree elbow, and this is barbed, the small 3/8 hose, and the smallest hose clamp that came with your kit. Notice there's only one clamp, and we have two sides that engage on this hose. This 90-degree fitting has a very aggressive barb, and it will not need a clamp. So we're just going to install that by just pushing it fully on until it hits the stop. Next, we'll slide the hose clamp on. And then we're going to insert the barbed end of the stock breather fitting, fully insert it all the way up to this shoulder. Now we're going to tighten that. For installing on the inlet elbow, there is an alignment mark. So what we'll do, we'll make sure that we start this nice and straight. We're going to tighten. And these are tapered threads. They're not designed to bottom out, but they will seal well once tight. So what I do is I reach my alignment mark and I'm snug. I'm going to go one more revolution and make sure that that thing is tight, and it's going to stay in place. And you can use a wrench, but again, there is no need to bottom out the fitting, and you don't want to bottom out the fitting. So I'm going to carefully turn till I've reached my alignment mark, and what I'm doing is I'm aligning this entire length with the alignment mark on the tube. And as a reference, this roughly points up to the small parting line or the flashing that you can see. So the orientation of that is critical for the location of the breather hose on the car. Looks like we're ready to install on the car.